I'm Dee Snider of Twisted Sister. We're hitting LA and there's no turning back. It's a public place with lots of private spaces. Golden era Hollywood rests in peace here.
Humphrey Bogart, Clark Gable, Walt Disney.
And the David statue stands tall. In Glendale, California.
When Forest Lawn does something, they do it the right way.
And an oil painting stretches the length of an 18-story building.
This painting is 195 feet long by 45 feet high.
Death is the first thing that comes to mind when you see the cold gray headstones of most cemeteries. But in Glendale, California, just 10 miles from the entertainment capital of the world, there is a final resting place not called a graveyard, but called a park. Forest Lawn Memorial Park is a one-of-a-kind burial ground that's more about living than dying.
Forest Lawn began in 1906, and when it opened as a cemetery, there was really no forest or no lawn here at all. It was really kind of a deserty, scrub kind of barren land with rolling hillsides, and arguably it was probably a 40-minute car ride or cable ride outside of downtown Los Angeles.
Los Angeles is famous for its movie stars. Secrecy, glamour, and wealth consume this town. People come to LA to make their dreams come true, and sometimes they spend their whole lives trying to make that happen. In the case of one man, the dream was a cemetery like no other.
When you talk about Forest Lawn, it's almost impossible not to mention the name Dr. Hubert Eaton. I mean, really, he can be considered the founder. He is the one that started the art movement. His name really is synonymous with Forest Lawn. They're very hard to separate.
Dr. Eaton actually came here as part of a sales team, and the cemetery had already begun operations for the first 6 years. And when Dr. Eaton arrived in 1912, he was hired as a sales manager for the cemetery to sell cemetery plots. They promoted him as a president, and that's when he started to really kind of reinvent what a cemetery should be. He wanted to reinvent a cemetery, and he said it could be different. Instead of feeling like it was dark and depressing, and it could be more uplifting and in a celebration of life.
When you look around Forest Lawn, there is one thing missing. Eaton thought that traditional headstones ruined the landscape and cluttered the views. So instead of big protruding tombstones, he created flat stones laid in the ground.
Well, at first the concept didn't catch on. In fact, in order to convince people that they shouldn't have a tombstone, which is basically all they ever knew, he actually offered them at a very significant discount to get people, encourage them to purchase a monument that was actually flush with the ground. And once that started and people saw what it looked like, that's when it took off.
Now that Forest Lawn had the wide-open LA views, art pieces were commissioned to create the scenery.
It's no secret that Dr. Eaton traveled quite a bit. But he didn't travel for travel's sake. He traveled for the purpose of actually trying to find the world's greatest art and be able to bring it to people of Southern California who wouldn't have that kind of ability to travel and see some of the works of Michelangelo and Leonardo. So that is probably one of the greatest gifts that Dr. Eaton gave to Forest Lawn, was his search for beauty and his search for art.
Fast forward 100 years, and now with 6 memorial parks in Southern California, we have the modern-day Forest Lawn.
At Forest Lawn, we have a lot of different types of art. We have mosaics that are spread throughout the park, as well as statuary. So we really encompass a lot of art forms. If you go to a museum, we have stained glass, we have objects from around the world. So it really is an art park, if you will. When Forest Lawn does something, they do it the right way. There is no skimping on materials or cost. You know, structures are looked at. Everything is done the exact right way. And if you're going to reproduce David, you're going to go to that expense. Why do it, you know, in a 5-foot cast? You go all the way. Where we're standing now is at the feet of a very famous person in history. This is Michelangelo's David. On one of Hubert Eaton's trips to Italy with Professor Vene, who was the superintendent of fine arts in Italy, Eaton saw the David statue and said, "Oh, wouldn't this be fantastic to have in Glendale, California?" So Professor Vene said, "Well, I think we can do it." So what they ended up doing was Professor Vene supervised the work, but they basically had a cast made of the original David. And from that cast, they made the reproduction of David that you see here. And just to be exact, the original statue is 16 feet and 9 inches. So is our David. He's exactly 16 feet and 9 inches.
This David comes with all the same parts, too. But in 1938, there was a bit of a scandal.
One thing about the original David, then of course, our David, has always been the fig leaf controversy. As when David was created, he did not have a fig leaf. However, a fig leaf was later put on due to all the complaints that we had gotten. The idea to get back to original art prevailed, and the fig leaf was taken off. Since David was unveiled in 1937, he unfortunately has become very susceptible to the California earthquakes. If you'll notice, if you look at David, the entire pressure of 16 feet of marble, which inherently is not the most secure stone, rests literally on one leg. So whenever you have an earthquake, the ground obviously shakes, rattles, and rolls. We've lost a lot of Davids actually in the past 36 years.
David's not the only Michelangelo masterpiece at Forest Lawn. There's a reproduction of the Pietà, depicting the Virgin Mary holding the dead body of Christ. The original is located in St. Peter's Basilica in Vatican City. And the famous Moses, an exact replica of the sculpture completed in the 1540s.
My favorite piece of art here at Forest Lawn in Glendale has to be the statue of Moses, Michelangelo's statue of Moses. I think it's one of the most powerful statues that Michelangelo had ever done.
Eaton had a line into the Vatican to make it happen.
In order to get the mold of the statue, it was the only time the Church of St. Peter in Chains in Rome was ever closed. And the Vatican gave Dr. Eaton permission to make a casting of that statue to which we could reproduce it for Forest Lawn. There's a small little nick on his knee where it's purported that when he was done, Michelangelo was so taken by his work, he stood back and struck his knee, commanding the statue to speak. It just has all kinds of things that make me attached to it.
Eaton started building Forest Lawn's Great Mausoleum in 1917. Not just any mausoleum, but one inspired by the Gothic architecture he saw while traveling on Italy's northern Riviera.
A mausoleum is a building where people can be interred. They can either be cremated or interred in a traditional manner. And what you see in the Great Mausoleum are wall niches, and each wall niche has someone behind it. At this point in the Great Mausoleum, there are definitely several thousand people interred in the mausoleum. This is a Gothic-inspired building. It was based after the Santo Campo in Genoa, Italy, which is a perfect example of kind of high Gothic architecture. And in Eaton's inspiration to bring art and architecture for people to hear, is one of the buildings that he thought would be a wonderful one to recreate. You know, the type of architecture you could do back in the 20s and the 30s is so much different than what you can do now. In this mausoleum alone, they use over 5 different types of marbles. Everything from your green to your pink to your white Carrara. But the whole building is just beautifully done. You know, when you're in the Great Mausoleum, every single quarter has its own personal touch. One quarter looks different than the other. Everything is different, and there's just a unique touch to everything we do here.
The ultimate promoter, Eaton put up billboards all over LA touting Forest Lawn as a first step towards heaven. In the 1940s and 50s, hundreds of thousands of tourists visited Forest Lawn. Even the stars of Golden Era Hollywood wanted to be a part of it, in life and in death.
Forest Lawn is in the middle of Los Angeles, and you cannot deny that Hollywood is here. You're the home of so many movies. There's Hollywood luminaries that chose to be interred here. Clark Gable, one of the leading men of the silver screen.
On January 16, 1942, Clark Gable received the news that his wife's plane had crashed. Carole Lombard, one of Hollywood's top comedy actresses at the time, had been on a tour raising money for war bonds with her mother when tragedy struck. Gable was devastated. Lombard and her mother were both interred in the Great Mausoleum at Forest Lawn. When he died 18 years later, Gable joined them.
Jean Harlow, who unfortunately died at a very young age, chose to be interred here. But at the time of her death, she was actually an actress that did more movies than any other actress of her time.
We do have quite a few celebrities here at Forest Lawn. Clark Gable, Humphrey Bogart, Jean Harlow, Red Skelton, Jimmy Stewart, Sammy Davis Jr., George Burns and Gracie Allen, Nat King Cole, Alan Ladd, all here. One day I actually saw George Burns visiting Gracie, and he was left totally alone, and you could just tell he really appreciated that.
Over the years, Dr. Eaton's passion, or should we say obsession, grew. Some men dream of building cities, while Dr. Eaton dreamed of building this park for the dead, with a touch of Hollywood.
As you're walking into the garden, you'll notice it's an incredibly tranquil area. There's several wonderful marble statues surrounding the courtyard, creating a very peaceful setting where one gets to contemplate the mystery of life. The Mystery of Life statue is actually the largest statue we have in our parks. It's actually a statuary grouping. It spans 15 feet long, which is rare. Most of our statuaries are single or, 2 people or 3 people, but this one has 18 figures. Ernesto Gazzari created this piece, and literally it took him almost his entire life. Each character has its own interpretation of what the mystery of life is. A few examples are the little boy who holds the bird that has just come out of his egg. He looks to his grandmother full of wonder, and grandmas know everything. But you can see on her resigned face that she just doesn't have the answer. You also have 2 lovers, who their answer to life is in their first kiss.
You also have the scientist who's just troubled because he can't figure it out with all of his science. What is the mystery of life?
What's interesting about Forest Lawn is the commitment to making the park just always look beautiful. Marble is not very easy to maintain at all. It can be very porous. It's also prone, cracking. There's actually a whole department here, the bronze and marble department, that's dedicated to making sure that all of the statuary and all of the art pieces, urns, benches, statues in the parks look beautiful.
The grounds of Forest Lawn are 290 acres, with over 10 miles of road to get around in. So small courtyards were built to create intimate areas, some with no public access.
There are a lot of areas that the public can go to at Forest Lawn, but the other thing that Forest Lawn offers are locked gardens, like what we're in now, the Gardens of Memory. And basically the only people that come in here are actually families that own property here. And this basically creates a nice, peaceful, tranquil, contemplative area just for families. At one time we did actually have music piped into the garden areas, which played classical music. The statue I'm in front of is Motherhood. Very simple name, but it expresses a lot more. It was done by Silvio Silva, who's an Italian artist. What's interesting about Silvio is he actually became one of the renowned sculptors of his time. Not only did he do sculpture, but he also did work for Pope Pius XI. If you look at the statue, notice the mother looks a little tired, a little resigned, but also very protective of her brood of children playing around her. You also have little symbols like the cornucopia, with the bounty of fruit. Basically, fruit is life, and you have the children playing with it. So you get a whole mixture of basically the hope from children, and that's what Silvio meant by this piece.
Forest Lawn was one of the first cemeteries to offer every burial service in one spot. Flowers, cremation, undertaking, and funeral ceremonies. They called it one-stop shopping. To continue their mission to celebrate life, Forest Lawn constructed churches with more than funerals in mind. The park drew thousands of people who wanted to get married there.
I was actually married here at Forest Lawn, and we have so many weddings. In fact, I would say we probably have almost 70,000 people have been married at Forest Lawn since we started.
Many people get married at Forest Lawn. Ronald Reagan and Jane Wyman, his first wife, were actually married here at the Wheat Crook of the Heather.
Weddings at a cemetery. How LA.
People would flock to the cemetery because it was like no other place that they had seen. Plus, the artwork was just phenomenal. In fact, prior to Disneyland actually being constructed, this was known as the #1 tourist location in Southern California. Easter sunrise services here that would have over 15,000 people in attendance. And you look at those pictures and you think, what a draw that was and what a special place that the community even then thought Forest Lawn was, and still today.
And there was another reason that visitors flocked to Forest Lawn. 3 really big reasons. A stained glass window featuring the Last Supper, and 2 of the largest paintings in the world.
Eaton would take trips to Italy and France and look at different pieces of art. And while he was in Italy, he went on a tour and he saw these wonderful stained glass windows. And he said, oh, it's such a shame that this type of art form is dying. And Professor Venne, who was the superintendent of art in Italy, said, no, it's not a dying art. There are still stained glass artisans. So that's where he met Rosa Moretti. And she talked about how she made stained glass. He said, one thing I've been thinking of is the Last Supper. Wouldn't it be beautiful to see the Last Supper in stained glass?
Eaton wanted Rosa to reproduce Leonardo da Vinci's painting of the Last Supper, housed at the Santa Maria del Grazie in Milan, as an immense stained glass window. Rosa's one condition? To work from da Vinci's original sketches.
It took several years, and there was a lot of pressure. So Rosa, in a panic, contacts Eaton saying, I cannot finish the window. Eaton asks, why? What's going on? The face of Judas, it keeps breaking, is broken 5 times. It breaks one more time. I cannot complete the window. Eaton basically told, well, try as much as you can. The building is built. We need the window. Basically, what's ironic about the face of Judas breaking is he was, at the Last Supper, the person that comes out that was the traitor to Jesus. So the fact that his face breaks 5 times, kind of points to, the traitor. There's like a day of silence and kind of panic, and she calls him, "It is finished." And so then the window travels to America. Depending on the time of the day you come, the window always looks different based on natural light. So sometimes it looks a lot more ethereal and lit, and at other times it looks more dark and foreboding.
The Last Supper was just the beginning of Eaton's trilogy of art, depicting the dramatic story of the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ.
Where we are is the Hall of Crucifixion Resurrection, which houses 2 of the world's largest paintings. We have the Crucifixion by Jan Stika, which was painted in 1897. What people don't realize is how long this painting is, how high. This painting is 195 feet long by 45 feet high.
It took Stika 30 years and a slew of artist assistants to complete this massive painting.
It was supposed to be in the St. Louis Exposition, but unfortunately there was some miscommunication. They did not have anywhere to show the crucifixion. So it ends up being wrapped around a telephone pole and put in storage. Oddly enough, though, this is a good thing, because what people hear about the St. Louis Exposition is there was a fire and all of the other paintings burned.
The artist couldn't afford the cost of shipping the painting back to Poland. Years passed, and he died before ever seeing the painting again.
Now at this point, we have to do a little bit of forest lawn history. Hubert Eaton had already established the Last Supper window, which is a stained glass depiction of the Last Supper, but now he wanted to continue the story of the trilogy. So he's searching, where can I find a crucifixion painting? He sends out his scouts. One scout ends up in Chicago saying, "You wouldn't believe what I found. I found your painting." So it comes all the way across the U.S. on train, comes to Forest Lawn, and he builds the Hall of Crucifixion, which is the building we're in now.
The first time I ever came to Forest Lawn was back in 1951 when the painting was just unveiled, and my mother brought me to Forest Lawn. I was only about 6 years old, but I still remember it vividly. And we went and saw the Last Supper window, and we went up and saw the painting, and there used to be 300 or 400 people all lined up to go in there.
It is an oil painting. It's called mirroflage. It's an oil painting, but what it is it's done in panels and it's adhered to a wall. So actually this painting will not move unless you take the wall with it. If you look to the left of the crosses, you'll see 2 men talking to each other. One of them is Paul. Jan Stika was so in love with this painting and it meant so much to him that he painted himself in. So actually what you're seeing is a self-portrait of actually Jan Stika. What you see here is The Resurrection by Robert Clark. Eaton felt he had completed 2/3 of the trilogy, but we needed the final piece. He had to have a monumental-sized painting. You just couldn't do a small resurrection after you'd seen the crucifixion. So what he did is he proposed to local artists in the LA area, give me your depiction of what you think the resurrection would look like. The one he liked the best was Robert Clark's depiction. He painted the painting on site. It's actually painted onto a panel that was then put into a frame. Robert Clark worked on the scaffolding and painted the resurrection here. It would be too impossible to try and move in, rolling a canvas, bringing it in, so why not just paint it on site?
What a lot of people don't realize about Forest Lawn is we have been here 100 years. And as we're preparing to do the centennial, we have 100 years of archives. And when you start going through all the letters, the photographs, the documents, you really begin to realize how important Hubert Eaton was in the whole history of Los Angeles. He was a promoter. He believed in what he was doing. He believed in the idea of a cemetery mortuary together. He believed in community. And he built relationships with all kinds of people in the Los Angeles and, frankly, in the Hollywood arenas.
You know, people always say, well, how many celebrities are here? Or show me, so-and-so. And my first response is, everyone's a celebrity. Everyone's important. Everyone's important to their family. And because you had some fame and notoriety doesn't mean that you don't also deserve some respect and reverence in your final resting place.
Forest Lawn has found a way to make the sacred grounds of a cemetery more about inspirational art than death. Whether it's a replica of Michelangelo's David or one of the largest paintings in the world, they've taken art to the extreme, and definitely with a touch of Hollywood.